Basically, I'm going to try and talk a little bit about sensors that we can use in extensive systems, that the test of whether they're applicable in commercial situations, whether we can get the data down a LoRaWAN network, I think. So we're moving that. So I'll just note the fact I've got 3 authors in the top line from my own organization I'm linked to, including John Holland, who's on the call and will answer all the difficult questions about environmental sensors and any ecological questions. But on the second row, we've got people from Modern Institute, which I put in relatively lately because I'm now using some of the data that's come from them. Okay, so I want to acknowledge 2 projects, the one on the top right, which you guys have already learned quite a lot about, and that's very much where we're coming in from the outside saying, oh, wouldn't it be nice if you did this? Have you thought about doing that? And then the bottom left is a large European Union project which we are leading across quite a number of nations of Europe, focused on precision farming in extensive and intensive small ruminants, sheep and goats, and that's a situation where we've got to roll our sleeves up and actually deliver some work. So a very quick context of Scotland and UK and upland farming. Again, we have a particular typical system here where we've got some high quality land in the bottom of the valley, but much of the farm and the place where most of the animals spend most of their time is rangeland in your term and hill in our terms. So it's low quality, it's extensive, and at the moment today it's probably about half that view will have snow on it. And the animals we're looking at are extensive sheep. In these environments, we typically have 1 lamb per year, stocked at anywhere from 1 ewe to 2 hectare to 2 acres, down to 4 acres or thereover. And we have cows, not dissimilar from your rangeland cows, calving maybe indoors, maybe outdoors in the lowland part of the farm, but then put to the extensive grazing in the summer, graze there, weaned off that pasture. The calves go off to in a feedlotty type scenario, but much smaller than in the US. And the cows often go back to hill to regain condition and then come down in the winter. So quite some similar issues. So similar but different. And I always show this type of slide. I don't want to go through the details of it, but these systems, the management systems are different. Inspection is crucially different from intensive systems. We've heard earlier today, if you were there, quite a lot of issues with communication, whether it's by mobile cell phones or whatever. And very much about the culture is very much focused on the animals. The animals do come central to it. And I think we've heard that in some of the comments we've got today. So to come to the crux of the stuff we're talking about here, the questions that we need to ask the animal or its environment in these systems are somewhat different in terms of the technology that we can use and apply both in science but also in practice. They are fundamentally quite challenging, some of them. So the first question is, are you there? Can we actually get data connection between the animal or the sensor in the environment and the end user? The next really important question for extensive systems is, where are you? You've got to basically thinking of GPS as being one logical solution, but where are you is the fundamental question. If you can't solve a problem with an animal, if you can't find it, and sometimes the location itself is both the problem or indeed the solution to your problem, saying everything's okay or everything's not okay. The animal's in the wrong place, etc. Are you okay? Animal state seems again to be the critical issue. We want to be reassured that your animals are okay, that they're fine, they're not in trouble, or not in a state that's acceptable. Or reverse, we want to be told by an alert that there's a problem with the animal or with part of the flock standing out there. And now we're moving on from all that being quite passive, where we're collecting information, to where we're now actually asking the animals to do something. Again, we've got quite a lot of experience with virtual fencing systems. So we're now saying, please animal, would you now do this or don't do that? And we're now becoming much more management focused at doing things. And we'll pick up and say, there'll be a number of presentations about virtual fencing today, which have been really interesting. And then lastly, I want to pick up this question. I think Santiago mentioned it something, but the data and its correctness is really valuable. In extensive systems, it's really time consuming to go and fix a problem that's not a problem. And every time you do it and you find it wasn't a problem, that the animal is fine or that the fence is still okay, then you lose confidence in the kit that's giving you a false alarm. So it's really a problem. So some of the questions are there down the left-hand side, and some of the bits of technology I want to briefly touch on down the right. We're covering all those in our projects, and just to pick through them. The one I won't mention, the fact I've currently got a graduate student looking at public opinion of the issues associated with virtual fencing. Nobody's mentioned that the general public, which is pretty vociferous in Europe and UK, have an opinion about the likelihood of giving animals electric shock, and just saying it's a bit like an electric fence isn't quite good enough when you think about true animal welfare. Anyway, back to LoRaWAN sensors and the environmental picture. Now, John Holland, who hopefully will stick around towards the end, can answer any difficult questions about that. But just again, giving you a flavour of the environment we work in and the environmental sensors, how they're arranged around this landscape. That's about a third of our, maybe a quarter of our experimental research farm there, from the river to the right, going further up and back up the hill, and to service those sensors and to service wearable technology on any livestock with LoRa communicating device on them. We currently got a number of gateways, and here's just showing 2 of them. We're hoping to install a new one shortly, but we've got 2 there, which would allow us to cover the area with gateways, not on towers, but just on aerial, sticking on buildings and connected to the internet. So you can see the range of different sensors there, which I'll pick up in a minute, because that's the issue. We want to manage a variety of things in the environment, but the big question is how do we use data to help us do that? And again, I've given you some examples there. One of the things we're particularly looking at shortly will be supplementary feed use, where we're providing food to the animals, and we want to look at how that feed is being used in a variety of ways. In your environment, water use, where is it being used, and is there enough of it, is really quite critical, etc., etc. So let's move on quickly. So just again, look at those environmental sensors as they come in, and on the right are a series of battery-based LoRa communicating sensors, and there's a series of dashboards which are showing long runs of data, but clearly that dashboard can be accessed on an annual basis, a monthly basis, a weekly basis, daily basis, or in real time, to give you information that's relevant about various things. I noticed there for the first time, lightning strikes appear as an interesting thing you can collect data on. But I want to focus, because it's me doing the talk, about wearables, at things we put on animals, and critically the sort of things that we expect to do. It was interesting in the talk this morning, in your morning, that the actual animals' welfare and the fact it's carrying this kit around should have been picked up. I mean, I was going to come in and say, no, you got to remember, all this has got a cost to the animal. And here's an example of an unfair cost to the animal, where it was struggling a little bit to graze with this too much kit put around its neck. So we got a situation where to get stuff into practice, the farmer or the grant body, maybe examples, has got to pay for it, but the livestock has to wear it, and it's got to work for all these parties. And if it doesn't, it isn't going to happen. So let's just look at our current scenario of our prototypey type systems, which we've got on the ground for our sheep work. What we're doing is just in different contexts, working with this same system here. So let's just look at the LoRa setup, how it's working for us. We've got 2 routes to get the data from the animal into the end on the right hand side, into our server and dashboards. So the first one we started with 5 or 6 years ago was to have a GPS collar with a LoRa communicating module within it, and send the information on the bottom part of that yellow triangle straight from the sheep to the LoRa gateway aerial, and then straight into the internet. More recently, we now got, this is an example of one that goes into a 4G network server, into a 4G system, and then to a network server. But basically, that route has again been shown by earlier. I think Matt showed that similar route for the system in New Mexico. But the other route I'm going to talk somewhat about is also where we're actually taking the data off different sensors off the animal in a shorter range, and that data has been boosted across the field, in essence. In the example I'm going to give, to a stationary reader that basically collects the data, then parcels it up, packets it up in a LoRa parcel, and then sends that over the 100 meters or kilometers as need be to the LoRa gateway on the roof of the building or wherever. So that top part of the triangle is the example I'm also going to use as well, of how we're getting data from animals. So we got large bits of kit going directly to LoRa gateways, and we got smaller bits of kit going to a fixed or even a roving gateway that, a roving reader that then transfers that data in data packets via the LoRa system. I hope that's clear to you. So a little bit about GPS. That's our standby as we come back to think about where the animal is. That second question on my list, and we've done quite a lot of work. I think my first publication in GPS was 1996, so it makes me feel quite old. So it's quite old technology. None of it's new. It's really quite important to know where we're at. And it's a standby, but it's coming down increasingly in price, as somebody mentioned recently, earlier today. But it's still quite expensive in some respects. But that's our standby in terms of actually where the animal is. I just want to scoot past it. It's still going to be important in our systems as we go ahead. Just want to again just pick up the other bit of sensor-based kit, which we think is pretty important, is the accelerometers, where we want to basically look at basic activity in one form or fashion, or trying to diagnose particular issues, whether it's lameness or whatever. So one is, do the animals move more or less? Are they more or less active? Or have they got particular movement traits like lameness or mastitis, where there may be some issue that could be alerted to the farmer or rancher? What we're saying again, the sort of the routine of having to think about the fact that LoRa has got these constraints means we've got to think about how we get data through that. And if we can't get data through it, then it ain't going to get to farm practice in the next 2 or 3 years, because it's going to be that length of time before better systems, whether it's 5G or other systems, to really come on stream. So we're saying current communication routes, deep data you can get off accelerometers to sort of 12 million data points a day, just can't get through the system. So we're really saying that's pretty limiting. The simple data where you're doing some analysis on board, creating a motion index or something similar, is easy to transfer, but then you've got the challenge of how you use that to diagnose a problem. We, again, just quickly to highlight the fact we've got some background in that, where we've basically looked at looking at circadian rhythms as an approach to basically compare an animal with its preceding self, and also comparing outliers within the flock with the others in the flock, and see how they do that, and some success in, frankly, being able to predict whether sheep would die. And we're now revisiting the whole issue of accelerometers, because they are, frankly, so cheap and pretty capable of telling us some useful information about animals. But what I'll feature in the second half of this talk very much is on a new approach, a relatively new approach, which we've been doing for 3 or 4 years, but have now highlighted in this new tech care project, where we're looking at Bluetooth proximity as an alternative, or something that links to the other sensors we've got, to give us options to get location, activity, and movement from Bluetooth data. The problem is, and we've identified in the sheep experiment, there's no way that people are going to put even a $50 collar on a $50 sheep, because that's the sort of value that some of our sheep are in the order of. So we have to find kit that's going to be successfully acceptable at the sort of price. And the problem we've got, as I've said before, is that accelerometer data can be too narrow, too specific where do you put it on the animal, and frankly too big to actually get through the system. So come back to an interesting question, which I think needs to be addressed around this whole topic, is just how precise do we need to get data to be useful as a management tool? And I'll pick that up in a minute. But what we've got is a potential for cheap, low power Bluetooth, BLE, Bluetooth Fluid Energy, to be pretty accessible. It can give us presence pretty good, which then gets us to location. And then by looking at location change, we can get to activity, movement, and then to behavior change. And I'm just going to say, is it a poor man's GPS, GNSS? Is it a poor man's accelerometer system? I've never met a farmer who claimed they weren't a poor man, so it's clearly something that might have some resonance there. And I'll pick that up again. So what we're looking at again in our situation are 2 scenarios. One where we've got all the kit on ewes and lambs, and it works just fine on cows and calves the same way. Where we've got a roving reader, and here's just, if you got my picture, you can see that that's a box with various bits of kit in it, which has got the LoRa communicating module and a reader of Bluetooth devices. And here is a little Bluetooth beacon that we're currently using, which weighs about 14 grams. It's got a 3-volt battery inside it. And that battery could go anywhere between 2 years and 6 years in terms of its life. On the current advertising rate it adopts, it is low energy. And the other approach, besides putting that rover on, the roving U reader goes on the U, which has got a GPS in it and a Bluetooth reader, and then a LoRa communicating device to kick out the data into the internet. We've put just the beacon on the lamb, which could be the baby lamb or a bigger sheep or whatever. But it's basically the issue that we've got some with just the beacon on, but we've got a roving beacon out there. And the current commercial exploitation approach is going that you say you need about 10% of the flock to have the readers on, to the other 90% only have beacons on to allow you to watch the whole flock. We'll find out whether that works, but that's a commercial outcome that people are trying to push this next year. So the other approach that we're adopting is to put beacons only on all the sheep, but have fixed readers on certain locations. And the example I'm going to use, we've got them on fence posts in essence, or canes rising from fence posts around the field. So a little bit more complicated here, but what we're basically going for is how do we get to location from the fact that we've got a device, the beacon that says, hello, I'm here, and this is my name, this is my number, my unique identification, which we can program in. One is basically to say it's near to the fixed reader, or it's near to the roving reader, which itself has a GPS location. And the other approach is a separate one, but aligned to it is where we look at the signal strength of the beacon to reader communication, because that signal strength, received signal strength, can be and is a proxy for distance, which can then give you a coordinate-based mapped location via trilateration or triangulation, if you prefer something that's more frequently used. And to do that work, we've been adopting 3 scales of scaling up. First is off sheep, some which has been in small plots, and then moving to extensive. And I'm only going to talk about the first 2 bits of that, just give you some quick examples. So again, one of our co-authors, Amy, a graduate student, has been looking as part of her work, linking to ewes and lambs and their proximity between each other, which she's been doing work with readers and beacons on little electric fence posts at different heights and at different distances to come up with, in essence, calibration equations. And there's an example of some of our graphs. I'll just show you one. And for the particular early beacon that we were using there, we're getting a distance of 32 meters from reader to beacon in terms of getting data pickup. We're getting longer with these different models, and we're getting longer by going at 2.2 meters high, but that's another issue. And also we're getting a regression line of sorts between distance along the bottom and signal strength at the side. And again, she's testing that out with data. So quickly just moving on to, how does it work in practice? So in the small plots where we've had Lola plots in our collaborators in Edinburgh, the left-hand picture is the rectangles as the field perimeters, the paddock perimeters. The blue and orange and red are heat spots centered around the fixed readers. So there are 9 fixed readers around this paddock. And basically those 9 fixed readers are sending data via LoRa into an ArcGIS database. And in the fields, we've got 24 lambs with Bluetooth beacons on them. And they're also carrying detailed AX3 activity, traxial, store on board things. And 12 of them are carrying GNSS loggers, again, store on board, just so we've got validating data from them. And you can see some pictures of the various bits of kit there. MovePy. So we're comparing data from GPS on the left with data that we can derive from the Bluetooth thing. So the left picture isn't a shock to anybody. That's one day's movements of a sheep. On the right, well, I'll just give you an example where we can get one location with that star. So if a beacon turns up next to that reader, which is the second one down there, and quite It's quite a light one. There's not much activity around it because these are heat spots. The number of beacons being counted, but we just give it one indicator spot there. So that's all we get. And if we overlay the two maps together, one which is the real locations from the GPS and the 9 possible locations, because there are 9 readers, so we get 9 proxy GPS locations inside them. Then we get two maps like that, and they go, oh, that's not very good. But I'm going to say, well, actually, is it? Oh, no, okay. And I'm going to ask that other question that I think I was coming to today. If you go and ask a rancher or a farmer, would you prefer? I can tell that your cow or sheep is within 5 meters, but it's going to cost you $100, or I can tell you that your cow and sheep is within 50 meters, and that's going to cost you $10. Which do you think they might choose? Because it depends on the context of their question. So quickly, just shifting on, just looking at time, then I just want to show you that we've got, if we look at the GPS plot on the top line and the BLE plot as plotted as a latitude, longitude through some mapping software, we get, and that's a 5-day location, we get almost complete synchrony between those 2 bits of data, which is quite, when we saw this first, we went, oh, that's too good to be true. And again, I just want to whiz on to just show you that we've also looked at, different tracks on the sort of part days. And again, I've got overlaps, pretty good overlaps between the real GNSS locations and the predicted locations coming from zonal data from these readers. So I'm going, it's pretty encouraging. So to the conclusion, got thank you at the bottom there, Matt, so you're relieved. So there is some evidence that Bluetooth beacons and readers, and we're going to go further, and the inferred movement coming from them can give information about general levels of activity and movement patterns. Let's say we go back, you can see the distance traveled is depending on how we do it, it can be remarkably similar. Certainly looks at the scale of which farming would want, which is not within small meters, but big meters will give locations, or at least give you the last time it was seen. They are incredibly light, and they're less than $10 each. They're cheap, as I say, $10 each. They're very low power, and they're pretty robust. So we had these working. We didn't have a single problem with the beacons, and therefore practical. They're now moving up to about 300 meters range in the newest versions of them, and that therefore means it could be more useful at the scale at which many of you will be working. We see them potentially useful for ewe lamb, cow calf, proximity tracking, and potentially for use at water points or feed points where we can tell where animals aren't coming to, etc., etc. So that's the story. To come back to a theme for my final point, I agree with what other people have said today. I think the future certainly will be multiple sensors, and in this environment we're thinking of using Bluetooth with GPS as a sort of mix that comes together as quite a nice story. So with that, I should stop, Matt, and take it back to you. Okay, and thank you very much for listening to me, guys. Yeah, and girls.